I'm pleased to be joined by Daniel Taylor, who is a blogger, a video blogger on YouTube with Complaints on a Plate, the Complaints on a Plate channel. How are you doing, Daniel?
Good morning, Crispin, or should I say Andrew?
Yeah, if you like.
I was thinking, are you going to upgrade your channel to not the Laura Koonsberg show?
No, so we're stuck in that place in time when Jeremy Corbyn was stitched up by Andrew Marr. It's kind of that's where I think it's got. We've got to remember this guy Andrew Marr as a guy who undermined Jeremy Corbyn, and that's exactly what we're going to talk about now. Those shows on the TV, those political discussion shows. How many times have we seen sometimes so-called left-wing pundits go on and get totally thrown by the presenters? We're going to talk about whether it's worth appearing on those shows or not, because they can actually undermine the whole idea that you're trying to present, can't they? Now, I'm going to play. I mean, this week we had this week on, is it called Politics Today? I think
Politics Live.
Politics Live, yeah. On Politics Live, Ash Sarkar appeared on Politics Live. I'm just going to play a clip from that.
Just show you this headline in The Guardian. Ash, Jeremy Corbyn, former Labour leader, now sitting as an independent. Jeremy Corbyn will never stand for Labour again, say senior figures. This has been reported in the papers. Here, The Guardian. Do you think it's the correct decision, if that is what is made, to not allow Jeremy Corbyn to stand again at the next election as a Labour MP?
No, I don't think it's the correct decision. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn is a Labour member and he's having to sit as an independent MP. The people of Islington North have voted for Jeremy Corbyn as a Labour MP in every election since the 1980s, and Keir Starmer and David Evans have decided that they know better. I think that's really awful. I also think that there's.
But why do you think it's awful?
Because I think that what is fundamentally undemocratic. That's what the people of Islington North voted for. And there's one thing which actually I'd like to ask you guys, which is, do you think he's a good constituency MP or not?
Well, I suppose people...
There's a consensus that he is.
Right, well, he could be a constituency MP. What do you think? Is he a good constituency MP?
I imagine he is a good constituency MP. I'm not one of his constituents, but I imagine he's a good constituency MP, given the results he's had over numerous elections. I'm not privy to the conversations that he has with the Chief Whip, but my understanding is he's been asked to say a form of words and to express a certain level of condemnation around anti-Semitism and solidarity around the report that came through. I don't know what the status of that is, but I think if that was to happen, I think it'd be a very different frame. My understanding is he's not willing to do that, and that's what puts us in the situation we're in.
Yeah. Now that went on to say that Ash went on to say that there's nothing he could do to apologise about what he'd said in response to the EHRC report, but they had her on the back foot from the start, and they kind of put these questions out without her knowing what they're going to say. How did you think she did?
I think she did okay. I mean, I think it's an incredibly difficult position to be put in. I don't know how well I would fare in that sort of situation. There were some things she could have said, possibly, that may have made things better. But I think there's some key issues with this whole dynamic, which just make it, it's always an uphill battle. So the main one is the sort of general narrative that's in the public, and what's the assumed knowledge of the audience going into the conversation. So there's a lot of things that are not said that are just assumed to be known. And there are a lot of other things that I'm sure your viewers know, and I know, and you know about this situation, which are assumed not to be known by the audience. So the framing of it is, so for example, they ask, it's who is it? Anna Sawar says, from what I understand, if Corbyn just apologized, then things would be all right. Okay. And I don't think that's true. And there are a lot of reasons why that's not true. And it's also not that he should apologize. What he's asked to do is go back on his claim that there's been exaggeration and that people within political enemies within the party, we know the quotes that Corbyn said. He's been asked to go back on those claims, which increasingly there is evidence that what he said is true. So why should he go back on those claims, right? It's not really about apologizing. As Ash Sarkar says, he's apologized many times. But, you know, whether Ash will be given the time to explain what is quite a complicated situation and lots of extra information, which may be known to the audience, but is assumed not to be and would have to be clarified, certainly won't be brought up by the host. It's a very difficult job for her to totally bring in another framework to analyze the situation. And no one else on the panel is going to help. You've got, so Anas Sarwar, he's a Scottish Labour MP. He is taking the same sort of frame as the Tory MP on there and as a Tory commentator as well. And so really it becomes like this kind of, as you say, sort of from left and right. So Ash Sarkar is addressing Anas Sarwar at one point. As she finishes talking, the Conservative commentator behind her starts talking. So she's turning over here. So she's over here now. And so it looks like she's sort of out of her mind. You know, everybody else is sort of, there's a quite clear position here. Corbyn just apologizes and, you know, Labour Party would let him back in. Why is Ash Sarkar calling?
It's like she's quibbling and just being difficult. And why can't she just get on with it? I mean, I'll just show another clip that people may have seen before, which is, this is Aaron Bastani a few years ago on Neil's show.
Aaron Bastani, why, in the words of Robert Winston, is anti-Semitism endemic now in the Labour Party?
I think there's a few explanations. One is the party's membership's tripled in the last few years. So obviously there's been a mass increase in people that could potentially be persuaded by these ideas. I agree with what you're saying about digital culture. I think the internet has a huge role to play. I think if you look at that mural, there wasn't just the anti-Semitic trope of these 6 elderly men playing Monopoly. There was, you know, Masonic symbolism. There was somebody holding a placard saying New World Order. And this was like a melange of online conspiracy theories. And for me, it'd always been a constant background noise. I hadn't really taken it very seriously until maybe the Trump election. And with Labour, I knew it was there online. Personally, in my CLP, it'd always been very cordial. So there was a distance there. But when I saw the Corbyn response to this mural, which instantly struck me as anti-Semitic, there was something of a realisation personally where I thought, wow, this really is unacceptable. So yeah, I'd offer a structural sort of analysis. I suppose a sort of digital culture has leaked into what's a mass membership party to an extent.
I mean, he was asked, why is there a problem? He's got no, the question is quite leading, isn't it? But he ends up sounding like he thinks Jeremy Corbyn's done the wrong thing on the mural and he should have said something else and he's appalled by it. Was he trying to entertain them to think if he goes along with them, then he might be able to get round a bit later? I couldn't really get my head around what he was doing there.
The more I watch, I've seen that clip a few times, and every time I watch it, something else comes out of me. So this time I noticed that he links it with Trump, which, you know, is very strange. No one else has mentioned Trump and the Trump supporters and all of the sort of conspiracy theories around his base. Yeah, I think it's a very bizarre answer by Aaron Bastani. I think at the time it hasn't aged well. That's definitely one thing. I think at the time there was certainly a problem coming from the Labour leadership and how to deal with this generally. And one of the mistakes they made was sort of deciding that we are, in a way, it was a catch-22. If you are getting claims of anti-Semitism within your party coming from wherever, you want to take those claims seriously. You don't want to act like, say, Boris Johnson would do, which is just dismiss everything. Say, yeah, whatever, we don't care. You want to try and be different, right? That was Jeremy Corbyn's idea. We want to be a party that listens to people, right? So he's sort of caught in this position that he wants to take these things seriously. But then at the same time, what that ended up doing was that actually sort of legitimized what were basically, you know, groundless accusations that were going on. So Aaron Bastani, it's at that point in the crisis that Aaron Bastani goes on and he kind of says there is a problem, right? And I guess hopefully the idea is if we acknowledge there's a problem, we do something like the Chakrabarti report like they did, that we can kind of move on from this. At the time, Corbyn was getting attacked for numerous other things, sort of on a weekly basis. Things would fall by the wayside, a new attack would come in. I don't think there was a realization of how, by taking what as these grounds as claims and sort of just basically buying into the fact that there was a problem within the mass membership, that you then were on the back foot because you've sort of already decided that the membership was toxic, right?
Yeah. I mean, your work on this is incredible. Your analysis on this is incredible. You've got to go onto Daniel's YouTube channel, Complaints on a Plate, because there's some great clips. But this one, it's about 10 minutes. It's an analysis of a Newsnight discussion that explains exactly how anyone from the left is stitched up by these shows. So I'm just going to play this, and then we can talk more generally about whether it's worth going on these shows at all.
Observer journalist Sonia Soda, the political commentator Steve Richards, and the left-wing Jewish activist and historian Barnaby Rain.
Left-wing Jewish activist? Why do you feel the need to give us a little insight into Rain's political position, but none of the other guests? Anyway, Walk asks Richards and Soda the question, was it right for Corbyn to be suspended? Not why was he suspended, which is still what most people want to know.
Was Keir Starmer right to back a move to suspend him, if indeed he did actually back it and was involved in it? Was it the right move to suspend him?
My heart sinks when I hear people talk about an exertion of strong leadership. When that happened with Neil Kinnock, 80s, when he took on Militant, the newspapers hailing him. 2 years later, the same newspaper said he's leading a divided party, and he spent too much time looking inward.
Hang on, Kinnock purging the left in the 1980s, was that an anti-Semitism problem? Did I miss something here? Why would you bring up the purging of the left in the 1980s, unless you think that what's happening now is simply a purging of the left under the guise of anti-Semitism? I mean, that sounds pretty far-fetched. I'm sure I've misunderstood what's going on here. Let's see if we can get back on track.
First of all, this had to be an ethical decision, so it didn't really matter what the politics of this decision were.
It was ethically wrong for Corbyn to say that anti-Semitism cases had been overstated in the Labour Party. Ethically wrong.
Jeremy Corbyn came out and made a statement where he said that claims of anti-Semitism have been massively exaggerated for political reasons. He did exactly what the EHRC report said had been a massive problem in the Labour Party. So he did not leave the Labour Party with a choice. That was an ethical decision.
The EHRC did not say that at all. In fact, as many people have pointed out, it makes explicitly clear that one should be able to criticise the scale of the problem.
However, I do disagree with Steve on what I think the political ramifications of this are. I actually think there are very few political downsides of this action for Labour.
Notice the lack of interruptions here by Kirsty Walk. I mean, it's very nice of her to just let Soda free flow like this, express herself, but she has said something that's completely wrong, and Walk hasn't called her out on it. I wonder if Barnaby Rain will be given the same treatment.
I think Labour has always actually been a divided party. It's an incredibly broad church.
A broad church between what? Anti-Semites and anti-racists. That is quite broad.
There has always been this trend within Labour that there are elements of the far left who are incredibly unhappy with what they see as centre-left leaders who privilege getting into power over ideological purity.
It sounds to me like you're just talking about left-wing members of the Labour Party again, and that's what needs to be getting rid of. But I thought we were talking about anti-Semitism.
So this is a dynamic that has always existed in Labour. It will always continue to
warfare
exist.
can continue for a very long time in Labour.
It can, and Labour leaders have effectively dealt with this in the past.
Dealt with anti-Semitism or the left? Or is that just the same thing now?
The Labour Party has taken the right moral decision, and I think it was also, I don't think those political ramifications are there.
So then Walk asks a different question to Barnaby Rain.
But Barnaby, what about so many of, particularly younger people, who joined on the wave of the Corbyn mania that we saw a bit of there?
Not was it right for Corbyn to be kicked out. Rain isn't given the chance to talk about that.
Will essentially that be a fifth column in the party, or will a lot of people leave the party?
So Rain is then given a few seconds under a barrage of interruptions to put forward the other side to this story.
I have to say, I find it extremely telling and depressing that we are already talking about the party mechanics of the Labour Party and not about anti-Semitism. You know, I've spent years writing and talking about anti-Semitism, which is a rising problem alongside rising racism more generally, and it's been impossible to have a serious discussion on this subject.
It's a joke. It really is. This claim that anti-Semitism in the Labour Party has been so horrendous, so hurtful, that even Jeremy Corbyn suggesting that it had been overstated in any way means that he definitely should have been suspended, no questions asked. And yet the people putting this forward can't even talk about anti-Semitism for a second. They immediately start talking about how to get rid of the left wing of the Labour Party.
You've just had on as a
Let's have the question.
And then we get the first interruption. So Sonia Soda was allowed to speak for 56 seconds without any interruptions at all from Kirsty Walk, even though she said something that was categorically wrong about the EHRC. And in fact, when Walk did finally speak, it was to compliment what Soda was saying and prod her along. Rain is interrupted after 16 seconds. And her question was not even accurate.
Let me ask you the question then. Was Jeremy Corbyn right to say essentially that this report exaggerated the problem? Was he right to say that?
Corbyn didn't say the report exaggerated the problem, so Rain then has to correct her.
Well, he actually didn't say that. He said that he thinks that anti-Semitism is unacceptable. He thinks that it's a presence in the Labour Party. And he thinks that he just didn't say that the report exaggerated the problem. He said that some people in the media have exaggerated the problem. It's clearly the case. There was a Survation poll last year.
He demurred from the totality of the report.
Then in the middle of explaining what Corbyn actually did say, Walk interrupts again.
Barnaby, he demurred from the totality of the report.
He demurred from the totality of the report. What does that even mean? And why is it that Richards and Soda were allowed to free flow on the wider implications for Labour and their opinions on decisions made, while Rain is reduced to quibbling over exactly what was said?
It's just not right, I'm afraid. There was a Survation poll last year that found that most people in Britain think that about a third of Labour Party members have been disciplined for anti-Semitism. The real figure is about 0.3%. It's clear that while we have a Prime Minister in this country who wrote a novel about Sammy Katz, a cunning businessman with a proud nose and curly hair, there has been a political agenda to focus entirely on anti-Semitism on the left, in a deeply racist country with anti-Semitism overflowing across British society. And to point that out is simply a reasonable thing to say.
But the EHRC, Steve Richards, the ERCHC found failings.
And this is where Walk really gets into hot water.
There is no doubt it found failings.
The EHRC found 2 people with legally actionable cases, one of whom the councillor I'd never heard of.
Rain explains that there were only 2 cases. But then Walk says,
that does not mean he doesn't exist. That does not mean he doesn't exist.
No, it doesn't.
Rain is not denying that anti-Semitism exists in the Labour Party. He is simply pointing out that the scale of it is very small. But the fact that Walk says that does not mean he does not exist when Pam Bromley is a woman clearly shows that Walk has not read the report, has not even read the relevant parts of the report that they are discussing.
That does not mean he doesn't exist.
He very much doesn't exist.
But the EHRC found 2 people in a party of hundreds of thousands. I think anti-Semitism is unacceptable. I've been speaking about it for years. You just had on your programme as a credible commentator on bigotry, Margaret Hodge, who was sent flowers by the BNP for saying migrants should go to the back of the queue for housing.
Let me just turn to Steve Richards.
When it comes to discussions of bigotry in this country.
Rain is returned to at the end of the interview after Walk asks Soda a bizarre question linking attacks on synagogues to the disagreement by top Labour figures of the scale of anti-Semitism in the Labour Party.
If we're actually discussing anti-Semitism, we have heard and we know that synagogues are places that have to be guarded. You know, that social media is fused with hate and foul things towards both Jewish people that are in the public eye and Jewish people who are not. The fundamental thing is, if there is a disagreement at the top of Labour, do you think that Jewish people can actually feel safe?
I think that is a question for Jewish people.
Well, there's one right behind you, one that's been interrupted continually throughout this interview. Why didn't you ask him?
And I don't want to speak for Jewish people because I'm not Jewish myself.
Well, please don't then.
And I'm sure if you speak to Jewish people, and I think that's the important thing to take away from this report. There is still so much work for Labour to do. You cannot magic away a culture in a political party overnight. I'm sure lots of Jewish people will continue to feel unsafe.
Sounds like you're speaking for Jewish people.
Because there is a lot of work for
let me say, it is a very real thing, is it not, Barnaby? Day in, day out.
Yeah, it absolutely is. The evidence is extremely clear that anti-Semitism is on the rise across the world, including Britain, across the political spectrum. For the first time in my life, we had a party leader, though, in Jeremy Corbyn, who thought it was simply and obviously unacceptable that some families starve in poverty in a wealthy country like Britain.
So,
a man who has been on the side of freedom from Chile to South Africa to Palestine, and his name was dragged through the mud. But the most disgraceful thing about it was that you used, the whole political class, used me, you used Jews, as your factional battering ram to destroy a man who wanted to educate children about the crimes of empire and then give them jobs and fund the NHS. That is unimaginably tragic. And I say that as someone who faces anti-Semitism, who fights anti-Semitism. The attempt to use it as a cynical, the attempt to turn Jews into a political plaything.
But I think the AHCR report is I think we have to leave it there, but also to say that report was not a political report, it was anything but, of course, and that was the way that it was put together. So thank you.
To attack Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you all very much indeed. Quickly with the front pages now.
Again, throughout Rain's answer, you can hear Walk constantly cutting in. And then, in response, the only thing she has to say is, well, the EHRC report wasn't political, was it? Which is completely beside Rain's point. And again, not entirely true.
Well, that was fantastic. Thank you for making that video, Daniel. It really does show up the whole bias that goes on those shows. And he looked so uncomfortable and angry, Barnaby. Do you think in any way that it was a victory for him that he got the points over, or do you think that he looked like he was just irritable and not I don't know, how do you see that playing out, what happened there?
Yeah, I mean, when I watched it, I came away feeling the same as I think Barnaby Rain did, very angry. And that's probably not a victory, is it? When you watch an interview and you come, I don't feel that people maybe, I don't know, who don't have any side to this or don't know anything about this somehow watch that, they would probably think that he's more emotional about the issue than sort of logically looking at what happened.
Yeah, he looks like he's emotional, doesn't he? Because he's frustrated. So that isn't a good look, is it?
No, I mean, well, okay, it can be, I think. There's a balance. I think there were some early Jeremy Corbyn interviews which are really, really fascinating. When he was running for leader and the first year he was leader, there's one in particular where he's on Channel 4 News with Christian Guru Murphy, and he's asked about the famous saying Hamas are his friends quote. And he gets quite angry about it, but he also is, in his way of sort of being quite assertive, but calm in what he's saying. He explains what the newsreaders are doing. He wants to talk about the peace process in the Middle East, and they're turning it into a tabloid journalism story. And he really kind of gets, and Christian Guru Murphy gets a bit angry towards the end. He gets a bit defensive. Oh, we're not tabloid journalists, we're Channel 4 News. And I think that there is something there. And I think, but you can see Kirsty Walker is not flustered at all. And I don't think it's that you have to get under people's skin, but I think it would be inevitable if Barnaby Rain were to be successful in kind of moving the conversation. It would you would see that in Kirsty Walker, that she was starting to lose control of the narrative. And obviously you don't see that.
I mean, someone just mentioned Mick Lynch. I mean, he's very calm. He doesn't get angry, and he almost laughs at their questions when they're ridiculous. And that got lots of positive feedback, didn't it? But he's not on. Yeah. He's not on very much anymore, is he?
No, what's happened to him?
Isn't that what happens? Is they find people who are not able to cope in the way that they want to, and maybe I suppose if they had a debate, they'd have to set the conditions that there's three people who are all arguing against one person, and they frustrate them, and they'll say, yeah, that should work. I mean, is it worth? Do you think he should have gone on there? Do you think people should sort of also give them the veneer of balance? Because that's my fear of this is people from Navarra Media going on daytime TV or Sky News or whatever it is and looking like, yeah, we get all the different opinions on here, but they don't really. That's not helpful, is it? We want them to be shown up as biased.
Right. Well, I mean, if they weren't on there, then I don't think anybody would think that, hey, where are the left-wing cranks? We need those people on. This is really biased. I think they would just be outside the conversation if they didn't go on at all. Having said that, I think there has to be a lot more discussion and a lot more sort of investigation into, you know, who is allowed on these shows, why are they chosen, and how successful they are at actually pushing the sort of talking points and positions of the left. And I agree, looking at those clips, it's not entirely clear if these are the right people or that they're saying the right things or using the right tactics, or however you want to put it, to actually progress a sort of left-wing agenda in the national conversation.
Yeah. And do you think there are any good performers? Who's the best performer, you think? I mean, Mick Lynch is one, but are there any others who you think they're scared of to put on their shows?
Well, I think Barnaby Rainey is interesting because you might say that he didn't do a particularly good job, but at the same time, I haven't seen him back on anything since. And he did, you know, if you like break it down as I did, the points that he makes are excellent points. Whereas I think with Bastani, he did a different game where he tried to sort of meet them halfway. And I think I don't think that works. I don't think that's the right thing to do anyway. But it certainly makes it more difficult to then later try and change the narrative if you've already sort of accepted the framework in which the conversation is taking place.
Yeah, and I think this also underlines the fact that we have to have a left-wing media channel, possibly. That would help things quite a lot, wouldn't it?
A TV channel.
Yeah, of some sort.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Yeah.
maybe I could get on there my hat as well, and I'd call myself Andrew.
Yeah, it would be not GB News running for 24 hours.
Not GB News. Yeah, that's a good idea. Well, thank you very much for coming on, Daniel. Sorry to keep you waiting as well.
Oh, no, it's great. And thank you very much, Crispin. I just want to say, I'm just amazed at how much work you put into the show. Just talking to you over the last few days, and you doing this every week. I think it's absolutely amazing. And thank you very much for having me on.
All right. Thank you. Cheers.